Hi, it's Amanda DeVito Parle. Welcome to my podcast, At the Kitchen Table, where we will guide, inspire, and connect. Well, I'm here today with Duane Duggan. Duane is the king of Boulder real estate.
Right.
The king of Boulder, Colorado real estate. And really, I don't know any other way to describe it. My friend and a longtime mentor, somebody I look up to a lot and who's taught me a lot and has been a good family friend and a great broker. And did we ever do a deal together, Dwayne?
I don't know if we did.
That would have been fun.
So.
And so anyway, I wanted to bring you here for two reasons. One, just to honor this friendship and all that you have brought to the real estate industry. You're welcome. And also because you have so much going right now because you just launched The Velocity of Wealth, increasing the velocity of wealth creation through real estate by Duane Duggan with this sweet little golden egg on the front. It can be bought on Amazon. So I'm happy to promote your book. But so this is a new edition. The birth of a book is like a birth of a baby, isn't it?
It kind of is. It's kind of fun. It's pretty exciting when it first comes out.
Yeah.
So.
Well, congratulations on all your
Thanks.
success in the book and in life. And so I'd like to jump off by just starting by having you tell us a little about who you've been and who you are today. How did you come into this and why real estate and how did you get here?
All right. Well, first of all, I want to say that the mastermind group that Amanda and I are both in, there's like 25 of us. And we all become part of each other because like when I will say a few things today, it's things that I actually have learned from Amanda or other people in the group because we all have our little isms, we call them, of things that we say. But as far as how I got started, I actually got started in real estate because I failed my first accounting class and I was an accounting major. So I realized quickly that I was more of an idea person rather than a numbers person. So then I switched from accounting to real estate in college. So I got a degree in real estate and that's the only thing I've ever done, no other job, which when you look a lot of brokers out there in the world, they've always come from another job first. I mean, I don't know, did you have another job first?
Yeah, born and bred.
Yeah, so we were kind
a
of
thoroughbred.
right, because second generation you are. So
I worked at the Gap. Does that count?
well, I sold ski boots.
Okay,
so,
there we are.
You know,
okay,
so yeah, but it was sales, you know. It was like because it's in your blood. Because you're either a number counter, like I found I wasn't in accounting, or into sales, and sales is a hell of a lot more fun than accounting.
I think we both married bean counters too.
We did.
Yeah, there you
and
go.
that's in a couple, that's the balance when one of you is a bean counter and the other idea the other person is an idea person. That works together pretty good. Keeps your checks and balances going.
So you go to college and you don't do well in the bean counting, and so you go to real estate school and you get a real estate degree.
Yep. And I started out in Boulder, Colorado. I knew one person that owned real estate in Boulder when I graduated from college, and that was my father-in-law, and he wasn't buying or selling. In fact, he never sold his house until after he died. So
no kidding.
He wasn't my best residential client, but we did do some investing together. But that's kind of how I got started, was going door to door on houses in South Boulder. Mm-hmm. And the very first listing I got, it was an older lady that invited me in. We read the Bible together, really bonded with her, and then she died a week later. And her son called me and says, my mom died. I need to sell her house. And my first response was, great. See, I wasn't trained very well in how to say sorry.
In the skill of tact, right?
And then I got that sold like a week later, and I was hooked. You know, you sold your first listing by yourself and get a big commission. I told Debbie I was going to be retired in a couple of years. And didn't quite work out that way, but that's how I got my start.
Yeah, that's right. So I remember you telling me, or one of the things I really feel like I've learned from you was just, you know, the market changes. There's one thing we can count on, it's the market's going to change. And you bought a couple of duplexes in Longmont, and then the market changed.
Yeah, single families actually, and that was at a time when we could buy with FHA assumptions, so hardly anything down, and bought a stack of them, and the market was really tough. I had to sell a few houses a month to get commissions to pay the negative cash flow on them. So it was a little brutal start. Most people would have given up, but I kept going.
Well, so let's move next to your second career of writing books. How did you decide to write a book, and tell me about that process? And so why a book?
My career was starting to wind down, so I wrote my first book in 2015. And I think you're also a fan of John Gordon. He writes a book called One Word.
Well, I'm only a fan of John Gordon because of your encouragement.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, it's a love fest around here, right?
So in 2015, I read John's book for the first time. It's called One Word. And by the time you read the book, then you're supposed to pick your word that's supposed to guide you through the year. And so my word that year was significance, and how it tied to the book was career was winding down, and I wanted to leave some significance to all the others in the business. So my first book was called Realtor for Life, to share with people how they can do many other things for their clients as opposed to just selling their first house and maybe their second house. There's so much more that realtors can do to help their clients build a portfolio, build financial freedom, rather than just selling them their first house. So that's what's got me started on the first book, and that was directed toward realtors. So the next book, which we're looking at right now, The Velocity of Wealth, is all about the general public and how they can create financial independence. Because Amanda, I've learned from you, and we've talked about this in the mastermind group, that corporate America wants everybody to rent and be happy. Because I've heard you say, you rent your scooter, you rent your Uber, you rent your car, you rent your apartment, you rent your forever home, and be happy. And so my kind of viewpoint of like this book is, when I start out in the introduction there, it's like educational system of America is really failing, is because they're teaching everybody to be worker bees and rent the rest of their life, and they have to keep working because they got to pay rent. Right. And so the whole point of this book is about how to build financial independence and not get caught up in the whole worker bee situation. And so when I got this book done, which was in 2024, and it's really only, September now? But it's my word of the year this year was execute, not in execute, but in execute as in get the job done.
Get it done, yeah.
Right. And so my mastermind group, all you guys helped to encourage me to get it done. And now it's done, and I'm ready to get the word out and help a lot of people with this book. So.
Yeah. Well, it's absolutely fantastic. I didn't read it yet because I literally just ordered it on Amazon. It just came. But I did read your manuscript at some point along the way. Right. And I've sat through your Velocity of Wealth courses, which you taught sort of as a way to work out the book too. As you're working through the book, it's kind of nice to talk yourself through the sort of the programming piece of this. But start with, what is the Velocity of Wealth, and where does one start who is a renter and doesn't want to work until they die, so to speak?
Well, there you go. That's that quote that really kind of guided this whole thing, is that if you don't want to work until you die, you have to figure out how to make money while you sleep. And so, like, when I start out the classes, I look at everybody and say, have a come to Jesus moment. If you cut work today, how much would you have coming in? If the answer is 0, then it's start to put some of these principles to work. And, I write kind of like at a 5th grade level. I didn't really perceive that I was an author. And when you think about this, it's really so simple. The concepts that are in here, you just have to line things up. And if you do apply the things in there, and of course, the earlier you start, the better. I did have the blessing of having a degree in real estate in college, which I learned most of the things that I put into play during my life. But most of the public doesn't have this class in high school. I mean, if we went around the room in a big room of 50 people and asked how many people learned these concepts in high school, you would find out that none of them did. And if you asked a group of 40 people, have you heard of the rule of 72 and can you explain it to me? You would get a lot of blank faces, because even when I teach the classes and I ask that question, most of them can't answer what that is.
Well, right. And I think, this is part of the thing that can set successful people apart. I jokingly say my dad used to talk to me about, compounding interest and the time value of money from the time I was tiny. And I mean, unless you have somebody helping you through this, or unless you're, being able to come into information or conversations like this, or to have a friendship like we have had, you don't know these things early. And so this is a great tool. Somebody can pick this up actually and start to learn about the rule of 72, about compounding interest, the time value.
Well, and you told me you were reading the book with your kids. My heart just melted. Yeah. I don't really envision reading it to
Well, I have a 5th grader. So I have a 5th grader. So this is coming full circle perfectly for us. But my 5th grader wants to learn to invest in real estate, is what he said to me.
It's funny that they're a 5th grader, because I had a 6th grade teacher that influenced my life. He had the whole class buy 1 share of McDonald's stock and 1 share of Frontier Airlines stock as a class, and we followed that and we learned about the stock market. So I was actually learning about investing from Mr. Gardner in 6th grade, and it's had probably the biggest influence in my life of any teacher that I had growing up.
Isn't that interesting? Right. Yeah. Like you can look back on these people who they say one thing or they do this small thing that maybe they don't even really realize how it could impact, just the collateral impact of Mr. Gardner on your life, your compounded impact on mine and and Nolan's, right? And so how interesting that is, that if we can just share this brain trust of information about how to become successful. So what is it? It's buying real estate, buying a house.
Pretty much. I mean, when you look at, like on my notes for today, I wrote down kind of the key items that make real estate, or a part of real estate, the chance for acceleration of your wealth or increasing that velocity.
Okay, so let's take them one at a time then, huh?
So the first one is appreciation, and that actually ties really closely into number 2, which is leverage. But with appreciation, like in my market, I actually have been very blessed because I started buying in the late 70s. And our market over time has averaged 7% a year. We had times where it was 20% a year, but we had times like in the 80s when we lost storage tech, laid off 3,000 people all at once, oil business was in the tank, and we had flat years. But over the 40 some years I've been buying Boulder real estate, it's averaged 7% a year. So having control of an asset going up 7% a year is amazing. And then diving into number 2, leverage, the fact that I borrowed, especially getting started, I was putting no money into assuming FHA assumptions. So I didn't have any money tied up into it. I gained control of an asset going up at a certain percentage, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and keeps going up. So when you use other people's money, control an asset that's going up in value, that's a huge accelerator of your wealth. Okay. And then the next thing is depreciation. For a beginning investor, there's some true depreciation benefits. As you get bigger and you make more gross income, you have limits on the depreciation you can take. So you need to learn how to form LLCs, have the depreciation carry over to you personally, or figure out how to become a real estate professional tax status where there'd be no limit on depreciation.
Whoa. You're getting beyond the 5th grade level for my podcast.
I get excited.
But I do want to say the other piece of this is that you had smart people around you too. You hired a CPA.
Right.
They helped you understand depreciation. And so you don't have to be intimidated by depreciating your rental asset, until you get the asset.
Right.
Get the asset. And then you can figure out some of the benefits. But okay, so you appreciate, so it's going up in value.
Right.
You used other people's money,
right,
the leverage to buy the asset. You take the tax benefit of depreciation, which
right,
is how you depreciate a rental property.
Right, exactly.
And then you go into the next step here, which kind of moves away from just owning the asset itself, but it dumps into the IRA investing.
Right.
And so break from that.
The year that I was president of the board, it was 2005. My mission, or my word of the year, was IRA, which my mission was to teach realtors that they could invest and help their clients invest inside their IRA. And it's been okay since 1978. But if you call up your typical brokerage house, Charles Schwab or whatever, hey, I want to invest my IRA money into real estate, what do you get told?
Well, they say, no, just give me your money. I'll manage it for a fee.
Right.
You don't have to buy real estate.
Right.
And this has always been sort of the dichotomy or the collision between financial planners and real estate agents.
Right.
And so you're never going to get a financial planner to encourage you to buy more real estate because they actually want your cash to invest.
Exactly.
And you're not usually going to get a real estate agent to convince you to go put a bunch of money into the stock market.
And I know you're a realtor, so am I. I just started getting realtors from NAR recently about they set up IRA company like it's a brand new thing. Like, we're helping you. We're telling you about this. And it's been okay since 1978, and they're treating it like it just came available in 2024.
Well,
so I get a charge out of that.
The IRS isn't screaming from the top of the rooftops that you can buy real estate inside your IRA. But that's the point, is you can buy real estate inside your IRA.
So back to why it increases the acceleration of wealth or the velocity of wealth is when you own it in your IRA, it goes up in value. You can sell it, buy another one. You don't pay any tax on the gain. You get rental income. It comes into your IRA. You don't pay any tax on the rental income. So if you find out about this young enough and build up your IRA, you put it in a Roth, so it's never taxable.
That's right.
So like for my kids' age that are doing well in their careers in their 40s, if you get enough money in your IRA and do it in a Roth, that's the best way to do it. And now what's developed in the last, since 2005 essentially, is lenders will lend money to your IRA, which early on, that was very difficult to do. Pretty much if you had a sum of money was enough to buy a property or an investment, you could do it. But now you can actually get loans
inside the IRA.
Inside the IRA, not from your typical 1 to 4 unit lender. It's got to be somebody who's willing to do a non-recourse loan, which is different than the typical Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loan.
Okay, so you go next into equity management.
Yeah, equity management is something I learned about like over 20 years ago. And the idea is that you take a sum of money that for most people might come from refinancing their house. So they have a pile of cash from refinancing their house, and instead of going out and buy the big screen TV and the new Corvette and all that stuff that you do in your midlife crisis, you invested inside a life insurance policy. So Debbie and I put a pretty small amount of money into that every year for like 5 years, and it's grown to a huge amount. And then we also got the death benefit. So you invest inside an insurance policy, it grows tax-free, and it's kind of like a Roth IRA because you can pull it out as loans against the policy, and it's tax-free.
So you're talking about whole life insurance.
Right.
Okay, so a whole life insurance has 2 parts to it. It has an investment component,
right,
and it has a life insurance component. So you can just go buy life insurance in the unlikely event you drop dead.
Right.
But this is actually whole life where you get to invest inside of it. So you took some of the equity off of your properties.
We used our own cash, but I mean, when you read a book that, and I forget the name of it right now, but that's the premise of the book is instead of going out to buy the big screen TV and the new car with your equity when you refinance, you put it in a program like this, because in the long run, you'll be a lot better off than having spent your money on a depreciating Corvette or something.
Yeah, I got you. So, okay, so we got whole life insurance as managed through extra cash, because you presumably have extra cash if you've invested something and you're making your income in your working years, and now you're making passive income off of your investment. So you can use some of that passive income to buy whole life insurance.
Right. And usually what you do is you buy, like in our case, they were $250,000 policies. You buy the whole policy so it's paid for life, so you don't have to ever pay premiums on it monthly. And then you have this policy, and then you invest inside of it. You have your financial planner do it, and it just grows tax-free. And it's just been growing and growing and growing. And then if we want it for retirement income, which we don't need at this point, you can pull it out tax-free.
Yeah, and I want to get there because there is this sort of pinnacle that some shrewd people who are watching this may have arrived at, and I want to talk to you about that, so I want to put a pin on that.
So that's all kind of confusing. So a good source is a book called Go Tax Free by a guy named Carl Frank. You can get it on Amazon, and there's a whole chapter devoted to that. And in his book, he calls it our plan, O-U-R plan, but it's what I just described, and that's where I first learned about it was from Carl.
Okay. Owner-occupied 4-unit.
Okay. Another way that somebody, especially a younger person, might be able to accelerate their wealth is buying an owner-occupied 4-unit. And so why would you do that? Well, FHA's got a program that you can get in with 3.5% down. So if you buy a 4-unit, you live in one, and you rent the other 3 out, you've got this big building that is yours. You're living in one side. I mean, like a married couple with 3 kids probably isn't going to do this technique, but somebody getting started, if you could find a 4-unit, 3.5% down, rent the other 3, live in it a while, usually at least a year, and maybe do it again. But it's a way that you own a bigger asset. It's better than owning like if you could find a 4-unit in some little town for $400,000, can't in Boulder, obviously, but
not anymore.
But if you were going to buy a $400,000 condo, it's more of a liability, where if you buy a 4-unit that has 3 people paying you rent, it's actually more of an asset. It's 3/4 of an asset rather than 100% liability.
Yeah, well, this was always an interesting thing I learned, like your primary res, asset or liability.
Right. And so when you go
I'm asking you the question.
Your primary residence is a liability.
Your second home in the mountains, asset or liability?
Probably liability, unless you rent it.
Piece of land in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Liability.
Okay, it's because they don't generate any income.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a 4-plex where you're living in one side technically has a 1/4 liability, and 3/4 of that become the asset.
Correct.
Okay. And this is what's tricky about a single family is you either have to live in it and it becomes a liability to you because you have to go to work today.
Right.
These are Larry Kendall's principles. You have to go to work today to pay for that.
Right.
Or you put a tenant in it, it becomes an asset for you because somebody else has to go to work to pay
and
for it.
now, in a lot of cities, you can do an ADU, so it can become a partial asset rather than all liability.
Right.
But I always laugh when you make a loan application, you list your house and your car and your TV and all your personal property stuff all as assets. And that's totally wrong.
Right, they're technically liabilities.
Right.
I see your point. So, and then you talk about principal reduction, acceleration techniques, but just start with principal reduction. What's the benefit of that from a rental perspective?
There's nothing better than having free and clear real estate, because that takes care of you through good times and bad times if you don't have any loans. But there's also a balance of the leverage, right, versus free and clear. So as a young man, I was very leveraged, and I took much bigger risks than I'm willing to do at my point in life today. Mm-hmm. And so my point in life today is principal reduction. And so just this week, I added up like all the loans that we still have, how much I'm getting in principal reduction each year. And it's close to $100,000 just in principal reduction on all of our loans. And that's how much more equity I'm building every year because of the loans going down. That doesn't even count. Like if you own $10 million worth of real estate and it's going up 7% a year, that's $700,000. Amanda, how hard do you have to work to make $700,000 in brokerage a year?
Unless you're a doctor, you don't. Right.
And so again, that's why this is when you put all these pieces together and they start accelerating and compounding, that's when I still get chills, because all you have to do is know about it and get it started. If you do nothing, because the average American got told by their parents, don't buy a place to rent because the tenants are going to trash it. They're told by their financial planner, don't buy real estate, tenants are going to trash it. It's ingrained in them not to do what we're talking about. And that's kind of the intent of the book, is to change that for whoever chooses to listen.
Right, so, to kind of unlock that for people and say, you don't have to, you can do this. It's okay. Permission granted.
Because out of the thousands of clients I had over the year, I can name maybe 10 that chose to listen to what's in that book and now have real estate empires and don't need to work.
Yeah. Tell me about that. So what did they do? Like take a sample client.
Okay. One of my favorite clients, I won't give their name, but I met them first when they were attending CU. They were buff, living in a married student housing. So they were living almost free. And they chose to, I don't know how I got hooked up with them, but they chose to buy a rental. And I told them about what I knew of at the time, which later became what Larry Kendall calls wake-up money.
That's right.
And so buy one a year, and they bought seven in a row in a year. And then the idea at that time that we discussed was you buy one each year. At the end of when you're not going to buy anymore, you refinance the first one, pull the money out to live on, and that's tax-free money because refinance money is not taxable. And so that's what they chose to do, was at the end of year 7, they went back to the first one, refinanced, pulled cash out. But there's no reason you can't do that same plan, apply the mortgage acceleration techniques, and have free and clear ones, because free and clear ones can take care of you forever.
Mortgage acceleration is also known as sending extra principal to reduce the mortgage balance more quickly.
Right. And another person you might want to have on your podcast
we like
is
suggestions.
Jody Showman, because their company has a program called One Loan, which essentially it's a line of credit, and it's built up so that you can take a 30-year mortgage and get it paid off in like 7 to 10 years if you just work the system right.
So actually, we already interviewed Michelle Beeson at CMG Bank.
Oh, okay.
And Michelle Beeson and Jody Showman are peers.
Okay. And
Michelle Beeson explained the all-in-one loan. And it's just exactly that. It's a first deed of trust line of credit, amortized over 30 years, due back in 30 years, which is a big difference because most home equity lines of credit you get from your credit union or from your bank are due in 10. So you can take the home equity line of credit out, but you have to pay the money back in 10. They amortize it over 30, but due in 10. Okay, so for some people who are listening who maybe already have a primary res and they could have one rental or maybe two, and they want to increase the velocity of wealth, should they get to a certain number of rentals? How many is enough? How much is enough? How do you know when to stop and start?
Well, for us, we were almost up to 100 units, and then we started scaling back by trading into like what you and I talked the other day about the TIC, the tenant in common investment. But when you read the book, it talks about doubling theory, right? So in doubling theory, when you think about how this can work, if you just apply it, it never works out perfect. But let's say you buy that single family house and then you live in it first, get started, and then you rent it. So you have one single family house, you rent it for a year. And using doubling theory, then you 1031 exchange that single family house once it's been converted to a rental, exchange it for a duplex, okay? Own that a couple of years, then you exchange it for what?
Well, four
unit.
Yeah.
And then own that at 4 years and you exchange that for?
A multifamily 8-unit, 12-unit,
and then
16.
You take that 8-unit, 16, and then 32.
Yes.
I think 32 is a perfect number because when you look at people's lives, if you let's say you applied what we just ran through in 15 seconds, let's say you applied that over a 30-year investment program. And at the end of 30 years, you had used the acceleration techniques to reduce the principal. And at the end of the 30 years, you have a free and clear 32 unit. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Well, I think that probably is putting off an awful lot of wake-up money.
There you go.
Yeah.
And it can be that simple, is just using that doubling theory.
Right. Okay, so that's one strategy, but prices in Denver are high.
Right.
And mortgage interest rates are high, and the market is constrained. So what's the best advice for somebody to get going? How do they know what market to invest in? And how do they know they should start now, or should they keep saving? What if they don't have the down payment, et cetera? Like, how do you get people to get off the bench?
Okay, saving for a down payment is a different story, but to address what you asked first, when I bought my first multi-units in Boulder in the 80s, interest rates were 12% and rising.
Yes.
So I closed on the loans, signed on loans at 12% with had caps of 2 and 6, or maybe 2 and 4. But anyway, so that they could go like to 16%.
Right.
And people complain about the rates today. Yeah.
I know. And everybody in your generation does say that. They do say, like, I operated in a time where mortgage rates were 12 or 13 or 14%.
But people thought I was nuts for doing that. And I thought I was nuts. My wife thought I was nuts. But now, not so nuts.
Okay, so today in 2024, where rates are high, prices are high.
Right, but they said that in the 80s too. It's all relative. When I first started selling houses, baseline sub houses, 1,000 square feet, 3-bedroom, 1 bath, $27,000. I remember showing them and a lady telling me, they're never going to hit 30. They're just not. And now they're just short of 800,000.
Right.
It's all relative. And that's like for me as a old realtor, if you will, I can't be as effective as, say, Timmy, because Timmy, those prices are relative to what I thought when I was in my 30s and 40s. It's just you go with what's there.
So do you think that real estate prices will just sort of continue to go up, like that the $800,000 unit today that was laughably $27,000 in 1983 is literally going to be worth $4.6 million in 30 years?
I do.
Okay.
Why? Because there is not enough housing. That's why there's so many people living on the streets. It's the builders haven't built enough since the start of the Great Recession in 2008. There is such a shortage of housing, even though like when we go down Highway 36, there's apartments going everywhere. Across the nation, it's still a shortage. Population is increasing at a much more rapid rate than we can build. And you listen to Elizabeth Garner, the state demographer, she's actually slowed down their estimate of population growth in Colorado, over the next 30, 40 years. Mm-hmm. But in the words of Jace Glick, people are going to be living, loving, and dying, and that's what keeps the real estate market moving ahead. And there's actually more people living than dying.
Yes, well, that's true.
The rate of births is still high across the population of the planet.
Well, and I look at, people in the baby boomer generation who've actually stayed in their 2 stories longer than maybe they call it should have. And so some of those people in big 2 stories or 4 or 5 bedroom houses have stayed longer, primarily because they own them usually now and they're comfortable there and people don't like change. But, you also have sort of this demographic shift too, where people are saying they don't want to have children and they don't think they want the population to keep growing. And so how do you persuade them that actually isn't?
Well, I think for any investor, you have to make a decision whether or not it's going to be a good thing in the long run. Yeah. And that's why, again, as you grow older as an investor, early on you have higher leverage because if you do lose it and things go bad, it's other people's money. It's the bank's money. And as you get older, if the market goes bad, you've got plenty of equity because somebody's always going to need a place to live. I mean, and you have to choose the right spots. Like Boulder, Colorado is a pretty awesome spot. But to get started, like you asked earlier, how do people get started? I got started in Longmont because in the late 70s, early 80s, Boulder was too expensive then. So I went to Longmont. And so you just pick another town to get started.
Yeah.
You know, do the 2, 4, 8, just work the way up the ladder that way.
Talk about tenant quality, because you and I have somewhat different philosophies on tenant quality. It's jammed me up a little bit through the years, which is that I tend to buy a little bit exchange into a little bit nicer units instead of multifamily units. And so I've moved the asset up in quality, not necessarily up in quantity. And so I'm not sure that'll pay to work out for me in the end, but I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, in general, when you look at like a really nice single family, what it can rent for versus like a 12-unit apartment building, just the basic concept of multi-units compared to single family is what's called gross rent multiplier. And as you go up in units, like the more units in one spot, it's more efficient. You don't need 25 loans, 25 title policies. You can manage it because they're all closer together. So they're more efficient. So they have lower gross rent multipliers, which means you have a greater return on the dollar invested in multifamily than you do single family.
Right.
So you can put granite counters and sub-zero refrigerators in a single family, but it's not going to return as much as some mediocre finished college student rentals that will return a lot more. Now, I did see an ad in the paper the other day for a single family rental in Boulder for $45,000 a month.
Wow.
There you go. But that's not what I'm looking for. How long was it going to take them to get that rented? If that's really their cost to rent a $12 million property, I'd rather have a $12 million multi-unit building than a $12 million single-family house. I don't know if that answered your question, but from an investment point of view, multifamilies are much better.
Yes, for sure.
And I have no experience in commercial other than I know there's like a 30-some% vacancy rate in the office building in Boulder right now. So I'm glad I'm not in commercial because the residential world is chock full.
I do want to ask you about, the industry has changed a lot since you started in this business. And some changes have been good, some changes not so good, but for the most part,
and we're
changes.
talking brokerage now, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say where I was going with this is my question for you is, what do you see as the most impactful change in the industry? Maybe as it relates to investing, because we went down that vein, so we can keep talking about investing. But, what's been the most impactful or some of the impacts in the industry?
I would say that, anybody that's been in the business a long time or any business in a long time, by the time they retire, they go, I'm glad I'm retired. I just can't do it the way it was anymore. And I think when I started, I was door-to-door, 3x5 cards, telephone, that was it. And I watched the younger generation now. Everything's all on the computer. They're thinking their lead gen is all going to come off, through the computer. They do all the computer work as far as showing the property and everything. We used to have to go out and look at 20 houses. Like you'd have an IBMer in town for 3 days to buy a house. You'd go out and look at 30 or 40 houses in 3 days, and they would buy one.
Yeah, that's because there was 30 or 40 houses to look at.
And so that's a big change right there. How we do the day-to-day business, the inventory, prices, interest rates, the type of housing, it's just so different. I see realtors going a lot further. Like when I started, we thought Louisville was a long way away. I'm not going out to Louisville. And now you see people that are, in Pueblo showing stuff in Denver and vice versa, because they just drive a lot further largely because of the database that's available. Where in the olden days, when I started, there was a Boulder MLS, a Longmont MLS, a Vail MLS, and you better not cross those lines. If you're a Boulder realtor, you better not be going to Longmont. There was no rule on that, but that was kind of implied. And now you can go anywhere. So that's a big change.
Yeah. I mean, just the geographic kind of, and the city has grown. I find it interesting that we have so many more houses in Greater Denver than we ever did. And yet, and there are more sales residentially, there are more sales, but I just find it interesting that.
Yeah, you think of the amount of inventory that's been created by builders and how many are out there, but when you look at the total number of homes available, according to the DeVito statistics, the awesome stats, it is amazing there aren't more homes available, but there aren't.
Right. What do you attribute to that real downward pressure of inventory? Why is inventory so tight?
Well, I actually wrote an article about 17 reasons of why there was no inventory. That was more like, in the past 5 years or so. But number one is builders didn't keep up with production as far as meeting the demands of the population.
Right.
But there's a whole other slack of little reasons. Like, one that comes to mind is the $250,000 and $500,000 exclusion. So if you live in Boulder and you paid $300,000 for the house 40 years ago, and now it's worth $2.5 million, and you can only exclude $500,000 of gain, that law is so antiquated. You're going to stay in the house because you don't want to pay that tax bill. Mm-hmm. Now, if you read my book, you might convert that $2.5 million house to a rental for a year or two, and then convert it to an investment in a multi-unit and not pay any tax, because you did a 1031 exchange after you converted it to a rental, and then you've got a family asset that will take care of your family for a long, long time, rather than sending the government.
Yeah, this is a great tax strategy. It's brilliant. And honestly, this is why you're so smart and so successful, because you remember these basic principles over and over and over again. I mean, as if it's imprinted on your brain, and they are really imprinted on your brain. And so you remember these things. Did you ever move into any of your rentals? Did you ever establish residency to come out of them?
No, it's funny because as a realtor, I lived in the same house growing up. I lived with the same roommate through college. And Debbie and I bought our first house. We bought our second house. So
yeah, you've stayed.
You've never moved.
What's been interesting, Dwayne, too, actually, about just my observation of you and our friendship is that you've by far and away exemplified sort of the millionaire next door mindset, which is that, you bought a pair of tennis shoes and you wore them until they were wore out. You bought a green 2005 Jeep Grand Cherokee and you drove it until it was worn out, or, whatever. And so this is how I remember you, is that, you weren't wasteful. There was, you weren't wasteful. And I do see a younger generation of people they're somewhat wasteful.
Well, the old saying goes, you buy what grows, not what shows. So when you're a young realtor and you want that flashy Mercedes, that's what shows. But what grows is you should have invested it in a Boulder single family to get started. And
certainly an interesting concept. On this topic, anything else that feels like you want to just talk?
One more thing that I wrote down for key accelerators, and this is one that Gabe Bodner is an expert at, which is reverse mortgages. Reverse mortgages had a very bad rap as they evolved. But now if you read Gabe Bodner's book on reverse mortgages, you go, wow, it's not your grandpa's reverse mortgage. It's pretty amazing. So a couple key things on that: it can provide for income and retirement. It can get complicated. He's written a whole book on this, so I'm trying to summarize this in 30 seconds. But one of the things, it was often viewed as the last resort. So somebody's about to retire. I've got equity in my house. My last resort is I get a reverse mortgage so I can go to King Soopers with the proceeds from it. Okay. Right now, you talk to Gabe, who doesn't need to depend on payments from a reverse mortgage. But when he turns 62, which is the first year that he can do it, he says he will get one. And the reason is you can get a line of credit option. And the earlier you get it, the line of credit balance grows and grows and grows. All right. So what does that mean? Potentially, it could be could be income if you needed it. It could also pay for your long-term care. Having both Debbie and I just have lost our parents, in the last 10 years, and know that the last couple of years of life cost about $9,000 a month right now per person. Mm-hmm. And so back to the reverse mortgage strategy and Gabe talking about the line of credit, you can have a zero balance on a reverse mortgage, but it just grows and grows and grows. Mm-hmm. And then when you get to the point when you need it to pay $9,000 a month in maybe your life or your spouse's life, you can start drawing on that. It's tax-free, so you don't have to go out and earn $9,000, pay the tax on it to be able to pay the $9,000. It just comes out of the reverse mortgage. And so it can be a way that you can really fund late in life, very expensive stuff, rather than all it takes is one trip to a Medicaid facility to realize that you don't want your parents in there or yourself, and you start figuring out strategies like that to figure out how to pay for it.
Yeah, that's not an eye-opener, right?
So
I will push back on one thing, which is that I thought that once you stopped living in the reverse mortgage, you only had 1 year to sell the asset.
Right. But you can still have access. You can, as far as how you can get money out of the reverse mortgage, is payments, lump sum. Okay. And if you get lump sum, you know what you can do with it? Whatever you want. You can go and buy a rental property. And you know what's cool about that is you don't have to make any payments on that mortgage. So then your rental property, all that cash comes to you. So you have to look at the numbers to see if it makes sense. And then the line of credit, just you can take it all out. Once you move out of your primary residence, you do have to figure out how it's going to be paid back. And usually it's from the sale of the property.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So just to summarize, we talked about how the American education system is failing America and our children. It doesn't teach us how to be entrepreneurs and to increase the velocity of our wealth, but yet teaches us to be bean counters. And then we talked a bit about the One Word book by John Gordon, which I love, love, love. And that's something I've been doing, here at my organizations with my teams.
Sure.
Because it's just a great way to get center focused on how you want to spend your year.
Great motivator.
And then we talked a bit about these key velocity increasers. And so anyway, Dwayne, I really appreciate you coming down. Sure. I actually think I need you back because we have more work to do. So I really appreciate, would you come back if ever given a chance?
Because there's 32 chapters in the book, and we essentially talked about 8 of them.
Okay. Yeah. See, there is more work for us to do. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Right.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I just also want to close by saying you are a really special investor because you're a super humble guy and you've stayed hungry your whole career. You've been very humble. You have always loved people. And for that, I thank you because you've shown a nice path of being kind and living inside your means and, just giving people education. And you've always given more than you've ever taken. And I just think
that's part of the book is to share what I know because, you just feel the need to do that.
It's awesome. It is who you are. And anyway, so thanks for coming.
Thanks, Amanda.
You're welcome.